Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time it's the second part in the series in which I'm building a budget PC using a Ryzen 3 processor. In the first part of the series we looked at the processor and also the motherboard and the RAM and the cooler, and we put all those together. And so in this video I'm going to finish off the initial build so that we end up with a working computer. So, here we have a very large box containing our case, which as you can see is from Cooler Master. It is their MasterBox Lite 3.1 with a dark mirror front panel, customizable trim, and it's also got a clear side panel and cable management. And I think that's pretty good for a case which costs £39.99 or about $43 in the United States. This said, US availability can be limited, so I'll give you links to some alternatives, but you should be able to get a decent case for about £40 to $40 to $45. So let's grab Stanley my knife and get inside. And first of all I think we'll go across here. Lots of cutting here. Come on Stanley, help us in. There we are. Down the middle. Oh, it's exciting, isn't it? What's the case going to be like? And there we are. And oh, there we are. It's sitting on its end in the box, and I think to get this thing out is probably going to be something I do via the magic of filmmaking. Yes, so I'll pull it out, and there we are. Here we have our case, and I'm rather pleased with this. We can see the side panel here. It's got a lot of bits of covering film on. I'm going to take off just a couple of bits because we'll need to get to these thumb screws, but I'll leave on the covering on here. This is an acrylic side panel, so it could scratch quite easily, so I'll leave that on while we're building the covering film. And I think there's some covering film on the front as well. Look, yes, all there is. I'd love to take it off now. Much best to leave it on while the thing is being built. And it comes with some instructions and things, as you might expect. I've just showed you around the other side. You can see the back is, well, that side pretty much as you would expect. It's the side of a case. Let's continue round. You'll see on the back, this has got a lower power supply. I like the power supply at the bottom, better for balance, means your wires at the end will come out at obviously the base of the case. And on the front, there's the front, will look much better when I manage to take off this covering. But as you can see on the top here, we've got USB 3, USB 2 ports at the front, which will wire into the motherboard, front audio also to be wired into the motherboard. And this is the switch, which I imagine actually will light up so we can see it, but that's most definitely the switch. And this trim here, this red trim, can actually be replaced with other colours because they supply those, I think they're inside the case, we'll find out in a second, but so you can change this trim to another colour, and indeed you can turn this trim at the base around the air vent in there. If we just pull up this covering thing for a second, you can change this to another colour as well. So let's just remove the side panel. These are just thumb screws, so I'll just get all of these out. And there we are. We can now, oh yes, it came off very, very easily. There's our lovely side panel, which will be clear when we remove the covering film. And we take a closer look at actually inside the case. All we can see there's a box of stuff here. We can get it out. Come on, box of stuff, come out the case. It doesn't want to come out. Oh, it's fastened in, that's why. You'd think I'd noticed that, wouldn't you? Yes, it comes out like that. It comes out really easily when you've actually disconnected it. And in here, I imagine we have some exciting things. Come on, we've got things like, oh yes, this is the replaceable trim if we want to turn the red to black or to white. And also in here we've got all the wiring that comes from the front ports we've just looked at. We'll have to be plugging all that into the motherboard later. And in terms of cooling, you'll see there is a 120mm fan here at the rear of the case, and at the front of the case there's also space to add 2 additional 120mm front fans, and we'll be doing that later in the build when we add 2 fans with LEDs which will shine out beautifully through that mirrored front panel. If I flip the case over onto its side, you can probably see inside it a bit more easily due to the way I've got the lighting arranged here. And I should say that in terms of motherboards, the motherboard that will fit in here can either in this case be a mini ITX or a micro ATX board, and we'll be fitting that micro ATX board. Now, in terms of drive bays, there are no front drive bays on this board at all. You can't have an optical drive in this system. You've got no 5 1/4 inch bays anywhere, but we do have down here a cage for 2 3.5 inch drives and a 1 2.5 inch drive, either an SSD or a 2.5 inch hard drive. So that is our case, but of course it needs a lot of things inside it, not least it needs a power supply fitting down here. So let's go and have a look at our power supply. Right, here we have the heaviest part of our PC build, which as you can see is a Corsair VS550 550 watt power supply, which cost me £39.99 and which in mid-January 2019 also sells in the United States for about $39.99. Now, when you're selecting a power supply for a PC, the most important thing is it will supply enough power for all the other components. And the easiest way to make sure you get the right power supply is to use an online calculator. And I prefer the one offered by Cooler Master at coolermaster.com/power supply calculator. And so I went here and entered all the details for all the components in this build, including the graphics card and thing we'll upgrade to in future videos. And as you can see, it reported a total load wattage of 266 watts, a recommended PSU wattage of 316 watts, and an actual component rated at 400 watts. So a 400 watt power supply would be fine for this build. However, I'm a cautious person. I always like to leave a little bit of headway for unanticipated upgrading in the future, and as a 550 watt power supply was only a few pounds, a few dollars more than the 450 or 400 I could find, I've actually ended up with this 550 watt power supply. Never skimp on your power supply when building a PC. So let's get into this, and first of all it's in a sort of shrink wrap which we've got to get off, so just get into that thing. There we are. Oh, rustle, get this stuff off. There we are, down to bare matte coated cardboard, and I think it now just lifts at the end. Yes, there it does, and we have our power supply inside the box, and manuals and that type of stuff, power lead and stuff. Let's get the whole thing out. Oh, I do like opening up computing stuff. Good thump on the floor down there, and this is wrapped up not too well. There we are. I can't get into it. Come on, let's get out. Oh, there we are. It's not going to defeat me. I'm going to get into our power supply. Oh, it smells of being an electrical device. You can't smell that on video. There we are. There is our Corsair power supply. It says what the VS550 on the side. Now, the main thing you'll note about this power supply compared to some of the more expensive ones you might buy is this is not a modular power supply. In other words, all the wires here are physically connected to the power supply itself, whereas in some more expensive power supplies, all of the different leads have their own individual sockets, so you can plug in just the ones you need, which makes things like cable management a bit easier. But a power supply like this will work perfectly fine. It's just a bit more tricky to get things looking neat with this, but it'll actually do all the same function. So let's just unwrap this bit here so we can look at all the different leads we get available, so you're familiar with all the different connectors. Once again, I'm fiddling with wrapped up stuff. Let's have a closer look at these. And first we have this, which is the 24-pin ATX power cable that connects directly to the motherboard. And also connecting directly to the motherboard, we have this connector which goes effectively with it. This is the labelled CPU here. This is the ATX 12-volt power connector, 8-pin power connector. Next, this power supply comes with two of these. These are PCIe power connectors, which will connect to a PCIe card that need a lot of power, for example, a graphics card. And the way these are configured, they can be either a 6-pin or an 8-pin connector. Next, the power supply has got 7 of these, which are SATA connectors for powering SATA drives. And then it's also got a couple of these Molex connectors, which can also potentially power drives, but many other things can be connected via that. And finally, just for legacy purposes, it's got, if I can find it somewhere down here, there we are, we've also got a floppy drive power connector. So there we are, our power supply all ready to power our new Ryzen PC. Right, just before we start putting things together, I thought I'd introduce you to the final component included in the first phase of our build, which is our storage, which, as you can see, is a SanDisk SSD Plus, a 120GB SATA SSD. And this cost me just over £26 and also costs about $26. So it really is amazing value. Now, I did consider using an M.2 NVMe SSD in this build, which would have been faster but also more expensive, and I decided that the performance we need is perfectly well provided by a standard SATA SSD. Now, when we've got this with an operating system installed on it, we'll end up with, I would guess, about 90 to 100 gigabytes free, and whether that's enough or not for you depends on what you want to do with a PC. If you want to have lots of video files on the machine for video editing, or you want to store lots of big games, you clearly will need more storage than this. So clearly think about how much storage you need when you pick your particular SSD for a new system. Anyway, we're going with this one. I still think amazing value, about £26 or $26. Let's open the thing up with Mr. Scissors. I think there's a line on the back that tells us where to cut, so we'll obviously cut there, if in the wrong direction according to SanDisk, but I'm sure it'll be okay. And we'll get in hopefully somewhere like that, and oh, it's flown across the room there. You can't see that, but it has. And does that help us in? In theory, these packets are not the easiest to get inside. Oh, there we are, look. And hopefully, there we are. We've got inside. What's in here? Anything interesting in there? Not at all. Just the drive itself. We just have a closer look at our drive. And here it is. I do like storage, as you know. There's not a great deal to see here, really. It's just an SSD, but I don't know why it's got this label on. Let's get rid of that label. No idea why we need that on an SSD. There we are. That is gone. And as you can see, we've got on here a SATA power and data cable connectors. We're going to be connecting on one of the power cables we were just looking at on the power supply. Isn't it nice to think it'll be fitting on there? Anyway, nothing more to say about the SSD, so I think it's now time to get on with building our PC. Greetings! We've now reached that magical moment when all the parts we've looked at so far can come together as one inside the case. And since I saw you last, I've removed the screws from the back of the case to enable me to remove the metal side panel, and this is to enable good cable management so I can thread wires back and forth through all the holes you can see here. And I've also untied the case wiring and removed this packet of screws, and indeed here we've got all the screws which are supplied with the case. These are to enable us to fit in 3.5-inch drives. We won't actually need these. These are for fitting in a 2.5-inch drive or SSD. We will need these. These are the screws which will hold our motherboard in place and also our power supply in place. And finally, these are motherboard risers. We will need these first. So we take the first motherboard riser, and these need to be screwed into place to support the motherboard. You might be able to see there's a couple already in place. There's various places they could screw in. And down here there's actually a legend that tells us what to do. You may be able to see it says for micro ATX cases like we've got, we use the M symbol, and for mini ITX you'd use the I symbol. But it's important to note that even for micro ATX motherboards, not all the risers are needed. You mustn't put a riser in place where you don't need one. So for example, I don't need to fit this riser here. That would actually damage the motherboard if I did fit it, so I won't do that. But I do need to fit this one, so I'll take the one we got here and screw it in. I can only get it so far by hand, but they supply this rather nifty little tool which you just drop on the top like that. Then you can take a screwdriver, drop it in the hole and put it in nice and tight, and then just take that off, and that's absolutely fine. So I'll finish off all the risers, and there we are. And the next thing we need to do is to fit the motherboard I/O shield, the back plate. So this will go through in here, hopefully fitting in fairly easy, but these things can be a swine. Oh no, that seems to be in okay. That's absolutely fine. So now we can have the moment of truth where we take the motherboard assembly we put together in the last video and we introduce it to the case. I hope they're going to be friends. They should get on very well, hopefully. And hopefully we could just go put it in here. Can we line up the connectors on the back, get it through there? And hopefully we can. And there we are. Things are poking out the back all right, I think. And the trick is to get the first screw in place. It's all waiting on the screwdriver. Get that in place. Once that's in, our life is much easier. So there we are. And we've come a long way in building this computer. So I'll just finish off the rest of the screws. And there we are, and we now have our motherboard fitted in our case. So the next thing we need to do, Mr. Screwdriver, stop being noisy. He's going to do it again, doesn't he? Anyway, the next thing we need to do is to connect all these wires here. These are the wires from the case itself that give us things like the reset switch, the power switch, things like that. So let's start with the front USB 3 connector, which we'll plug in down here. And then we'll plug in the front USB 2 connector. And after that, we'll plug in the front audio. Finally, we get to these little wires, which are always a swine to fit. These, as you can see, are for the power LED, the power switch, the hard drive LED will be an SSD LED here, and the reset switch. So if we just go down to the connector, we'll first of all fit the power switch, and then we can fit the reset switch. And then we have to fit one lead of the power LED, and then the other lead of the power LED, and finally the hard drive or SSD LED. And there we are. All those wires are now in, and by the magic of filmmaking, I've also connected the 120mm fan to one of the motherboard's fan connectors down there. Clearly this all needs to be neatened up, but that can be done because we can just raise this thing up, and you see the wiring can be pulled through and secured at the back and made nice and tidy, which I'll do a little bit later. But for now I think things are going very well, but of course the motherboard is not going to work without any power, and so I think in the next section we should add the power supply. So I've now got the case standing upright so we can fit the power supply. And you might want to fit your power supply before you fit your motherboard, but because I was filming here, it was better for access to fit the power supply second. Anyway, just want to show you on the base of the case, we turn it over a bit like that. As you can hopefully see on the base here, we have a grill, an air inlet grill, and in fact it's even got a filter on it, so when all the dust gets sucked into this, it'll clog the basic filter, and then we can take the filter out and clean it up and put it back and keep things in nice condition. Anyway, I'm showing you that because if we put the case back roughly where it was, so you can hopefully see what is going on, we're going to be fitting our power supply. And here's the power supply, which I no doubt you remember from earlier. And the point I wanted to make, if I can just get this on screen and get around all those wires, is the power supply has a massive fan on it here, which will suck air in, and then it'll blow out air again through that way. Cold air in, warm air goes out. And people often ask, which way round should you fit your power supply? Should the fan be up or down in the base of the case? And the answer is, if you've got a lower air vent, it should of course be down, so that the air will come in through the base of the case, into the power supply, out the back. So let's just try and get this thing in here if we can. There we are, and hopefully it'll drop in like that. That is good. So if we just now go to the back of the case, we can fit the screws. I think the first one is here, to start that one off there. That's going to be fine. So I'll just whiz through the screws. And there we are. Those are all now in nice and securely. And back inside the case, you can see why modular power supplies are such a great thing. It's a bit like the juicer, isn't it, with all the snakes and stuff going on. It makes you think about, anyway, Greek myths and things like that. Anyway, getting rid of those, what I have managed to do is to thread the main lead which actually power the motherboard through the back, so they're going to be hidden with the cable management. So we now need to plug these into the motherboard. First, the main 24-pin power connector there, and also the 8-pin power connector. And with a bit of cable management undertaken and a reversal of my decision to thread the motherboard power cables around the back, I've decided to route these around the front. I wasn't quite sure about the clearances on the back, didn't want to damage the cables, but I think we're getting on very well now. Now, I haven't entirely finished on cleaning up cables and things, not least you'll see there's some cables still here, and the reason for that is because we've yet to add a drive. Now, this little SSD has been waiting very patiently to be the last component fitted in the build, at least in the first phase. And the way that drive mounting works in this case is that for a 2.5-inch drive there's a couple of little lugs at the back here, so you can take your drive and just put it onto those and it'll just click into place, and there we are, it's secured in like that, and you just drop 2 screws into the front. And as an aside, if you want to put a 3.5-inch drive into this system, for example, you might want to use this as your boot drive and maybe have a separate hard drive for lots of, say, video files, you could take a 3.5-inch drive like this one and it would slide in here, just under that, and go in, and this would then secure in with the screws going in from the sides. Anyway, we're not going to have a 3.5-inch drive in this system, at least not now, so we'll take our SSD and we'll connect it up to a power connector from the case, which will go in like that, and we'll connect also to a SATA lead which came in the motherboard box. That'll clip in like that, and then we'll connect to the other end of the SATA cable into the SATA 0 port on the motherboard, and the drive will then be fitted into the PC just as I showed you. We'll put in the screws and our PC is now equipped with an SSD. So, following some cable management, in which once again I've reversed my decision on where to put the main power cable for the motherboard. It is now round the back, and I have got a mass of power cables left next to power supplies you may be able to see, but there's nowhere else to put them. But I do think it looks pretty neat inside the case, and so all we now need to do is to put the metal side panel on, which will cover all those wires I've routed round the back, and to put the clear side panel, the acrylic side panel, on the other side of the machine. And so, with all of the protective film removed, we have in theory built a working computer. So, you are now invited to a very special birthing ceremony, which is the first power-up of our new computer. And the monitor is switched on. As you can see, I can't find the signal yet, so let's power this thing up. Let's press the switch, and let's see what happens. I can hear some fans, quite quiet, but there's certainly fans there. There isn't, of course, an operating system here. That's yes! We have got it. Wow, it's always a relief when things work, isn't it? Reboot and select proper boot device, insert boot media, etc. The PC is clearly alive. So what I'm going to do is just to press a Control-Alt-Delete to start things off again, and this time I'm going to press F2, and hopefully it'll take us into the BIOS. And yes, we've arrived in the BIOS, and there's a little thing on the side there telling us things are okay. Oh, it's got away. How do we get it back? There we are. Oh yes, we can see we've got our CPUs working, memory, etc. Voltages are okay, and if we just flick across the top here, yes, everything's working. Absolutely fine, isn't it? Our PC seems to be rather happy. Lots of things here which we can look at and experiment with and set up in the next video. And have we got the F2 thing? Sometimes it works in a Gigabyte BIOS. Oh, we have, yes. That's simple mode, showing us everything is working absolutely fine. So there we are. I'm very relieved we have successfully built a working PC. The total cost for our build so far has been £336.35 or $354.03 in the United States, where I've had to price for a Gigabyte B450M DS3H motherboard, as I can't find a retail listing for the B450M gaming model. Note that all of my purchases were made in January 2019 and that prices are constantly changing. In the next episode in this series, I'll be installing Windows 10 on our new PC and also Linux Mint, including setting up a dual boot. And then in the episode after that, I'll be fitting a graphics card upgrade, and then the episode after that, I'll be adding some extra cooling and also some RGB lighting. More information on this build can be found on explainingcomputers.com. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.